story. The last train's a gray afternoon when Clara stepped off the train into her hometown for the first time in 8 years. The small station looked as tired as she felt, peeling paint, rusty benches, and a faint smell of rain-soaked wood. She hadn't planned to return, not after the way she left, but fate wasn't kind enough to give her a choice. The call had come 3 days ago. Her mother's voice, brittle and hesitant, had cracked over the line. Your father, he's gone. The weight of those words had paralyzed Clara. She had always imagined this moment would come with some kind of resolution, some chance to fix what had been broken between them. But now it was too late. There would be no apologies, no redemption, no final words exchanged. Clara pulled her coat tighter around her as she walked toward the house she once called home. Each step felt heavier than the last, memories clawing their way back into her mind. The fights with her father, sharp words thrown like knives, the nights she cried herself to sleep, and the mornings she packed her suitcase without looking back. When she reached the old house, it was just as she had left it. The garden was overgrown, the shutters faded, and the wind chimes her mother loved still hung on the porch, clinking softly in the cold breeze. She hesitated before opening the door, half expecting her father's booming voice to demand why she was late. Instead, there was only silence. Her mother was in the living room, surrounded by sympathy cards and half-empty teacups. She looked smaller than Clara remembered, her once vibrant energy now dimmed by grief. Clara, her mother whispered, standing awkwardly as though unsure whether to embrace her daughter. Clara nodded, unsure of what to say. The air between them was thick with unspoken pain, but neither dared to address it. The days that followed were a blur of funeral preparations and polite condolences from neighbors Clara barely remembered. She busied herself with tasks, avoiding the memories lurking in every corner of the house. But it was impossible to avoid her father's presence. His old chair in the living room, his tools in the garage, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the hallway. It all reminded her of the man she had spent years trying to forget. The funeral was simple, as her father would have wanted. Clara stood by her mother's side, staring at the closed casket, feeling a hollow ache in her chest. The priest spoke about love and forgiveness, but all Clara could think about was the argument that had driven her away. It had been about her dreams. She had wanted to study art, to paint the world as she saw it, but her father had called it a foolish whim. You'll never make a living from this, he had said, his voice cutting through her like glass. You're wasting your potential. And so she had left. She had chosen her freedom over his approval, believing she could prove him wrong. But the years had not been kind. The art world was as unforgiving as her father had warned, and Clara had spent more nights struggling to pay rent than she cared to admit. Now, as she stood in the cemetery, staring at the patch of earth where her father would rest, she wondered if he had been right all along. After the funeral, Clara found herself alone in her father's study. It was a room she had avoided as a child, filled with heavy books and an air of authority that intimidated her. But now it felt strangely inviting, as though it held answers she had long sought. She opened the drawers of his desk, searching for something, anything, that could bridge the chasm between them. Amidst the bills and paperwork, she found a worn leather journal. Flipping through the pages, Clara realized it was her father's. His handwriting was neat, almost meticulous, and the entries spanned decades. As she read, tears welled in her eyes. The man she had painted as cold and unyielding was far more complex than she had allowed herself to see. There were entries about his fears of failing as a father, his pride in her artistic talent, and his regret over the fights they had. She's so much like me, one entry read. Stubborn, passionate, determined. I only wanted her to have a better life than I did, but maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I pushed her away. Clara clutched the journal to her chest, her heart breaking all over again. All these years, she had carried the weight of their estrangement, believing her father didn't understand her. But the truth was far more painful. He had understood her all too well. The next morning, Clara stood on the train platform, the journal tucked safely in her bag. She had made peace with the past in the only way she could, though the ache of loss would linger for years to come. As the train pulled away from the station, Clara gazed out the window at the fading silhouette of her hometown. She would return to her life, to her art, carrying her father's words with her. In the end, it wasn't the resolution she had hoped for, but it was enough. Sometimes she realized healing wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about learning to carry the pieces with grace. Let me know if you want me to adjust anything.